We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
We are taught a very narrow historical story of the world. You know, when as particularly Americans, I can't speak for like British, UK schools, other kind of Western schools, but we are taught a very narrow, very sort of Eurocentric history of the world in our public education, certainly my public education that I was raised with. And so I had 1 year of world cultures where we talked about the Middle East and China, and we didn't even talk about India. So I was not raised with any real context of Indian history beyond what I did in my own personal research. And I wish that wasn't the case, because a lot of this stuff just kind of gets glossed over, especially when we start to talk about like the colonialism aspect and the British East India Company and the kind of shit that they got up to in the Southeast Asian region.
I mean, I would say same. I knew British colonialism was extensive and horrific, particularly in India and in various locations on the continent of Africa. And obviously I know about like a little bit in name, basically, about Mahatma Gandhi and the independence movement. But that's it. That's like the extent of my knowledge. And like, I would say that in public education prior to like higher education, basically British colonialism was mentioned, and that was it. Mostly in context of like the fact that they were expanding global trade through the East India Company. Like, so it wasn't even, it was like there was a vague sense that like, because, you know, we were in the 90s, that like colonialism wasn't the best thing that ever happened. But when we talked about it, it was more about like the economics of it, the expansion of the global world because of it, I would say. What about you, EJ?
Yeah, same. I mean, we didn't talk about anything unless it was contextualized against things like budding capitalism across the globe. And that's a very interesting thing. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but
here's some conspiracy theory.
And I know our poor history teachers only had so much damn time, but I do think, though, it's kind of weird that we were all just sort of, you're right, like the horrors of colonialism are just glossed right the fuck over. And when I think about like even my own historical upbringing of what happened in Africa, like, I mean, from the beginning, like all of African history, the only thing I remember we ever touched on was the apartheid in South Africa, which is a huge thing and very much worth touching on, absolutely. But that was all we learned about the incredible continent of Africa and all of its rich history. So I think that in general, you know, again, our poor teachers only have so much time, but our school system does us a disservice because we do focus a lot on that, like you said, that Eurocentric and also very whitewashed view of colonialism.
And the view that champions capitalism as well. Right?
I mean, I think so, even in a subtle way, because you don't talk about the slavery that went on because of colonialism and the famines, like Katie was mentioning before we started talking.
Yeah, or the slavery that went on because of capitalism, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, which still goes on. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia and building the damn stadiums. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Qatar, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Qatar, I'm sorry.
No, wait, I mean, I'm sure there's slavery in Saudi Arabia too. Okay. Don't even get me started on that country. But like, yes, Qatar for the World Cup. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was thinking about. Yeah.
And I think the interesting sort of rider on all of this then is that because we have this Eurocentric view of world history and world in quotations, but it's sort of this approach that says, how did Europe affect the rest of the world, rather than what was going on in the rest of the world when Europe swooped in with capitalism. I think an interesting side effect of that is that when we talk about mythology and when we talk about ghost stories and things like that, we tend to just kind of take a Victorian kind of look at them.
A Western white Victorian look.
Absolutely.
Charles Dickens.
And so
Yeah. Right.
yeah, everything is that. It's your crumbling old Victorian mansions, and it's your old ghosts in like long white dresses moaning through the halls and that kind of shit. And so it's very fascinating whenever we get the opportunity to explore another culture's belief system when it comes to this. I find it really incredible to be exposed to that and say, wow, these are the things where we're similar. These are the things where we're different. Because again, in this Fortean world, a lot of it does end up being very Victorian ghost focused. And that might not be the case, right? You know, if we're talking about a multicultural world. So this is a really cool opportunity, I think, for us to do some exploring into stuff that not a whole lot of Western ghost hunting groups touch on. And it's hard. Admittedly, it's very, very hard. I spent a long time doing research into this and had to go with a bunch of different sources and watch different YouTube videos and things with captions and glean things from a lot of different places just to piece together a lot of this history and the history of the hauntings that happened in Bhangarh. It's not easy, you know. It's easy to be like, oh, you know, fucking Amityville Horror House is haunted because there was a murder there, whatever. It's much harder when you're like, none of these sources are in English. So.
Man, it sure is hard to slay monsters.
It is, isn't it?
Yes, so we are slaying monsters, and we've got Maddie J across the table.
Hello there.
We got Katie.
Hi.
And I'm EJ. And we're going to jump into
The Curse of Bhangarh Fort. Deep in the heart of India's largest state lies an abandoned ruin. Bhangarh Fort was once a thriving kingdom boasting temples, markets, and a palace, but now it's empty, forgotten by time. These days, locals and tourists roam these crumbling ruins, reveling in the history of this place. But by night, the massive gate is locked, and the entire site is shut down. Legend claims that anyone left behind after sunset takes their life in their own hands, because under the cover of darkness, the spirits of the dead haunt this fort, preying on the living. Unseen presences, ghostly voices, physical attacks, and even demonic possession may plague anyone fool enough to test these spirits. These tales have given the fort a reputation as one of the most haunted places in the entire world. And so the curse of Bhangarh Fort will be the subject of our series today. Now, my primary source for this will come from a bunch of different places, but some of the major ones that I used were The Popular Religion and Folklore of Northern India by William Crook and Braving the Bhangarh by Gaurav Mandan. I'll also be referencing the Bootbusters investigation of Bhangarh, as they provide not only some great background info, but also some pretty great jokes as well.
Is the Bootbusters like an Indian ghost hunting show?
Yes.
Nice.
Oh, you have to check it out. They're fucking
That is
great.
so
actually.
cool.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. I cannot plug them hard enough. And this is interesting too, because where these like Western ghost hunting shows tend to be more trying to prove that ghosts are real, the South Asian ghost hunting shows, particularly the Indian ghost hunting shows, are more, they just seem a little bit more inclined to be skeptical and more of like trying to prove that the ghosts aren't real. which is an interesting dichotomy, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this in previous episodes, but I feel like some of the OG ghost hunting shows in the US, like Ghost Hunters, if you watch the really early episodes, like I recently, for like a brief period, they were all streaming, and I watched from like the very, very first episode, and it was much, much more like that. Like it was much more walking around, banging on pipes, because, you know, they're plumbers, like, and just going to homeowners and being like, yeah, your plumbing system's messed up. That's why you're hearing these weird noises. Or like your electricity, you need to get someone out here to check your electricity. Like these weird vibes are coming from like the, you know, electromagnetic shit that's like coming out of your system. So it's interesting that they've remained that way in South Asia.
I miss those days, man.
It doesn't sell well, though. It doesn't make for good TV.
That's the thing,
It's
right?
less dramatic.
Yeah, that's the thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think it does. Like, because I think then
like
when
it.
they...
I would watch it.
Yeah, but I think then... Because first off, it's like interesting how they disprove it. But also, I think it makes it more crazy when something happens that they can't disprove. But it also makes me like I'm a skeptic. So it makes me more inclined to believe them when most of the time they're like, no. Whereas like now, anytime they find anything, I'm like, this is all fake. Like I'm enjoying watching it, but this is all fake, you know?
So I want to point out up front that I will be using the colloquial phrase Bhangarh Fort to refer to this location. However, the literal translation of the word Bhangarh is sister fort. So calling it Bhangarh Fort is actually saying sister fort, kind of like ATM machine.
Or like chai tea.
Oh, yeah.
It's just saying
Is chai-
tea.
TT. Yeah.
Oh, is chai the word for tea? I didn't know
Yes.
that. Oh.
My friend who's Indian told me that, and she said it makes her annoyed when she's in the US because everyone's like, I'll have a chai tea, and she's like, oh, will you?
I never knew that. Look at what you learn on this
know.
podcast. Like any good ghost story, this is going to be chock full of history. Bear with me, because I'm going to attempt to condense several centuries of Indian history into like 20 minutes. I'll do my best to give the broadest overview, but understand that basically everything in this series is going to carry the caveat, it's complicated. History, we talked about it before, it's messy, it's frequently overwritten, and it is canonically unclear. And our history today is going to start in the 16th century with a chieftain of Uzbekistan. That was Babur, descendant of Genghis Khan and child ruler of the region. At age 12, he ascended to the throne and proceeded to go to war with kind of everybody. About 2 years later, he conquered Samarkand, a hotly contested city in the region. While trying to quash a local rebellion, Babur lost control of Samarkand to nomadic warrior tribes. And over the next 10 years or so, they quarreled, this young emperor and these nomads, with that region changing hands several times. By the time he was 22, Babur was fed up and just kind of gave up on the city and decided to turn his attention to northern India instead. In 1526, Persian forces, backed by the Ottoman Empire, invaded India. And they came wielding gunpowder weapons like rifles and cannons. This is sort of like very early when we're starting to see black powder weapons. These attacks were successful, and the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, surrendered the region to the Persians. The Indian military leader Rana Sanga struck back, leading a force of almost 100,000 soldiers against the invading Persians. But unfortunately for Sanga, he had underestimated the power of black powder weapons. Although they outnumbered the Persians almost 2-1, they were dealt a brutal defeat. This decisive victory gave Babur a foothold in the region, and a new power was officially established. And this was the Mughal Empire. They would rule this territory for 200 years. Now, over the course of the next 30 or so years, Mughal power started to grow in this region. Babur was succeeded by his first son, Humayun, in 1530. Humayun continued his father's legacy of violent conquest, and he almost lost control of the region because he would take over these sites, then there would be a little bit of uprising, you had to send more troops into the uprising, and then, you have less troops to head your other battlefronts. So basically, there's just a lot of conflict going on in this time. He died in 1556 after falling down a flight of stairs with an armful of books.
No way.
Yeah.
He fell down his library stairs and then he died. After spending decades fighting wars, that's how he died.
Yeah. He spent 26 years fighting wars in rule of this place and fell down library stairs.
Man, it's always the dumbest shit, isn't it?
I know. He probably thought that as he was going.
Yeah, he's like, oh man, after all that, this is going to be it, huh?
So Humayun's son Akbar ascended the throne to take his father's place. And he had been raised on this legacy of violence and war and all of this. But Akbar was the first person to come in and take kind of a different approach to this. He strove for more peace in the region. And he would actually appoint his non-Muslim detractors into positions of power. And he did this very intentionally to let them continue their own worship. He didn't tax it. He didn't outlaw it. And he started to actually unify the region through this process.
He called it the divine faith, and it was modeled on like a mystical Sufi brotherhood, but basically the object of it was to basically forge alliances and get diverse groups into the service of the state to form like a cohesive political community. So like obviously like something that we would recognize as like a pretty modern way of forming a government, a functional government.
It sounds like DEI, honestly. Like when you bring different perspectives in and you see positive things happen. This is what happens when you bring in different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I think from what I was reading, it seems like he felt it was more of like, if you give everyone a stake in the government and they have a pathway to power and wealth and success through the ruling power or through the dominant system, then people are less likely to rebel, to be angry at you. I mean, I don't know. It feels like common sense, right? If people are happy and living their lives and they have a way to be successful and take care of their families, they're kind of like, yeah, cool. You can be in power. That's fine.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of was it. He had seen his father and his grandfather had bulldozed into this region, had so much trouble controlling the areas that they were taking over because there were all these uprisings after they took them over. And so he was the first person to come in and try this different tactic of like, well, if you're uprising, that means that you're upset with the way that we're conducting ourselves here. So what if I elevate you, I fold you into my government and give you a stake, like you said, and this way, if my government fails, you're failing too. And that unity is going to be a thing that really pushes the Mughal Empire to become the successful powerhouse that they end up being. Now, that's not to say that he didn't also expand the boundaries of his empire, because he did. But he did so with this unified force of Muslims and Hindus, and just transformed the region. He supplied his military with a very robust taxation system where he had agricultural taxes making up the backbone of the governmental wealth. In a lot of ways, the Mughals established the outlines of industrialization. Their empire rivaled that of the Qing dynasty and at its height produced nearly 30% of the world's industrial output.
Wow.
Yeah. The government funded irrigation systems, which helped them yield more and better crops, which in turn fueled revenue into their agricultural systems. And then the taxation on that agriculture left Akbar basically sitting on mountains of cash.
He built the Taj Mahal
Oh,
in Agra.
that's cool.
No, sorry. Actually, his grandson was the person who built the Taj Mahal, but really cool.
So much money. They had, it kind of goes to show how much money the Mughal Empire had. Like, they were rich. They made this agricultural industrialization their business, and they were doing a great job at it.
Yeah.
Which makes everything just so devastating with what happened.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Katie.
No.
Spoiler alert.
Sorry.
Spoiler alert.
We all know.
But they also were known as builders. So they really, a lot of the beautiful buildings that people now go and visit in India were built by them. This fort included, but the Taj Mahal, there's something, another place called the Red Fort that people go to visit. Anyway, I just thought that was really fascinating that, yes, to Matt's point, they had a ton of money and they also spent it building these really beautiful places.
And the architecture you see now, and I mean, I was kind of ignorant as to how much of an influence the Persian Empire had on India. But when you look at the architecture, you can see the traces of that Middle Eastern architecture in some of these, especially like northern India places. Mm-hmm. But he understood that, if we're going to tax agriculture, we need to help people establish that agriculture. And so we're going to give you money in order to help you cultivate the land. And this is going to become really important later on because they treated their land really, really well. And when colonialism starts to creep in, we'll see what happens when somebody comes in and doesn't.
Yeah. Also, we'll see what happens to industrialization. But
now, part of this reform effort that he had created was constructing new fortifications throughout the empire. And although we use the term fort, these are essentially like walled cities. They serve as military fortifications, sure, but they're also protected markets. They're residences, like actual apartment buildings. They're temples. Akbar himself resided in the Agra fort, the oldest in the region. But as his control expanded, he started appointing emissaries who were allowed to construct their own forts, which they could use to kind of like centralize these satellite governments. One of these emissaries was Akbar's brother-in-law and general, Bhagwant Das. The two men had served several campaigns together. During one of their first battles, Bhagwant Das cemented his loyalty to Akbar, seeing that Akbar was under fire. He used himself as a shield and took an arrow to protect Akbar. And Akbar was so thrilled that, he had been kept alive by this guy, that he gratefully awarded him the title Amir ul Umra, or Prince of Princes, and gave him a province to rule. And that was Amber, which included the city of Jaipur in the northwestern India. This is a dry and arid region, and it's broken up by the mountains of the Aravalli range. It averages about 25 inches of rain a year, with the vast majority coming during the monsoons. So a lot of the time, it's just straight up dry, and then you get these periods of absolute constant rainfall. And in this region is where Bhagwant Das began construction on a fort for his son, Madhu Singh. This fort was supposed to be built on the southern tip of an oasis, not far from a lake. The Ajabgarh forest to the north made the region habitable and provided crops for this new city that he was creating. The forest that has a very diverse population of wildlife. We have rhesus macaques, we have wild boar, kingfishes, eagle owls. There's plenty of deer. There's something else, too, if you want to guess and jump ahead a little bit.
Bengal tigers.
Yeah, there's quite a few Bengal tigers, and they will factor into our story
I was going to
in a
say
later
ghosts.
episode.
Katie's not wrong. I mean, that is kind of the topic. So
Anyway, keep
Nice.
going. We all see where my mind is.
I love it. Katie's like, get to the ghosts, get to the ghosts.
Enough of this history crap.
It's not true. I love history, but yes, keep going.
Rumors started circulating as far back as the initial construction of this fort. Madhu Singh, the prince, allegedly contacted a sadhu, or a holy man, for advisement during the construction process. This would be pretty standard procedure as you're coming into a new region and you want to make sure that everything is going to be spiritually copacetic for you. Sadhus were sages who shunned civilization, and they kind of went out and integrated themselves in nature and lived among the nature to try to find spiritual oneness. They follow a yogic practice. They're celibate, and they spend a lot of their time praying and meditating to achieve this natural balance for themselves. And this particular sadhu, Baba Balanth, rejected this fort that they were building. And he said that it's going to deface these mountains. It's going to deface the natural order of this region. And if you construct anything here that is higher than his own dwelling, that will bring eternal misfortune to this place. Did this actually happen? I don't really know. Did it happen the way the story says? We don't know. As with a lot of haunted locations, a lot of the history becomes apocryphal, or at least maybe a little bit inaccurate. And when you're talking about a place that's been around for centuries, you're bound to get a few rumors and superstitions surrounding this place. So as we start to move forward, as we start to talk about some of this more mystical history, keep that in mind, that some of this might have happened. Some of it might have happened in a more vague way than what we're talking about. And some of it may not have happened at all. The most important part of Bhangarh's history is that in the intervening 450 years between its construction and now, it's become so inexorably linked with fables that it's hard to tell what came first. It's possible that Madhu Singh actually did contact a sadhu before constructing his palace. But it's also possible that that story was retroactively created after the fort was abandoned in the 1700s and was used as a way to kind of supernaturally explain why the fort was abandoned. Either way, Madhu Singh, in our story, ignored the sadhu's warning and set to building his palace and his village. According to legend, columns from the fort cast shadows on the sadhu's home and ensured that this curse would come to pass. There's another version of the story where Madhu Singh actually agreed and said, I believe you, I will build my fort, but I will make sure that all of the walls are low enough that your home will not be shaded. But when his successor, Chattar Singh, took over, he raised the walls and blocked out the light and triggered the curse. He didn't know about it, but he triggered it anyway. The fort itself is constructed in the foothills of the Aravalli Range, with the palace on the lower slopes. There's a natural spring that feeds into a pond in the palace grounds and provides them with fresh water. The architecture of the fort is a mix of Mughal and Rajput aesthetics. This is where you get your domes and your minarets. You also have these massive walls and graded stepped towers that you see in a lot of the Indian architecture.
Yeah, beautiful.
There's a mile-long wall that is built into the cliffside that serves as the outer defenses of the fort. And in this wall are 5 gates, which allowed strategic access to the interior and the town within. The central gate is the Hanuman Gate, which gave access to the main road and the bazaar. Immediately inside this gate was the Hanuman Temple, which is a squat, square building. Do you know Hanuman?
Do I know Hanuman?
Yeah.
Why?
Because
Why would I know?
Hanuman is a god. I'm
Oh,
not
it's
sure
a-
if you would know what that is or
It's
not.
a god. No, I don't think I've heard of that.
Oh, Hanuman is a god with a monkey face and a human body. And I found, according to Durham University, Hanuman represented strength of faith and control and temperance. He could help overcome obstacles, but his assistance should only be used in the service of others.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so you can't just like pray to Hanuman and have him help you unless you are in fact trying to do something good for someone else, which is pretty cool.
That is very, very nice.
So traveling beyond this temple, you have a cluster of homes and shops, including a theater where dancers would perform and their residences attached to it. Then past this, you have a long promenade and bazaar that runs parallel to a winding stream. There's 2 temples flanking this path, one to Ganesh on the left and the gorgeous Gopinath temple on the right. Today, the Ganesh temple is ruined. It sits in ruins. But the Gopinath temple still stands. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's very intricately carved. Every surface has these mosaics on it. And it depicts mythological scenes of gods and warriors. Following the stream west leads to the Purohit Jiki Haveli. And that's the residence for the village priest. That would have been like a tantric practitioner performing hatha yoga.
This sounds like paradise.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's just
Well, this is the
This is
thing,
great.
because we call it a fort, right? And so when you think of a fort, again, we have this kind of idea that's like, oh, well, there's going to be buildings and there's going to be ramparts and guard towers and all this shit. But it was really a city.
I get the sense that this was obviously it was a very prosperous community under Akbar and everything, but like, were there raiders? Were there like constant people trying to like come in and siege and take over? Was this just a precautionary thing to build these forts, or was there like a constant push from someone?
When I was reading about the history of this time period, it does seem like Akbar really consolidated the empire and made it more peaceful than his predecessors and really the people who came after him as well. But it sounded to me, the closest thing I could relate it to, it did sound a lot like the same time period or slightly earlier in Europe. It might be relatively stable, but basically it's like constant small warfare, like constant skirmishes.
Yeah, you're pretty much spot on there, Katie. I think from my reading, it seems that it was pretty stable, but there were always these little uprisings that kept popping up here and there, and so it wouldn't be that unusual for there to be not necessarily an entire kingdom empire marching to war, but more like little marauding groups. Yeah.
That's interesting because I'm listening to Hardcore History, Dan Carlin, talk about.
Love Dan Carlin.
Yeah, he's the freaking best. He has a series right now, Twilight of the Aesir. Not sure I'm pronouncing it right. It covers the warring factions in the Middle Ages, the constant raiders coming in from Scandinavia and elsewhere. And I never really put it together before until he said it, but all these castles all throughout the British Isles and like the Republic of Ireland as well, Germany, all these different little like, I don't know, forts, I guess you'd say, is because the power was in the decentralization. They probably would have had a central something, but you needed decentralized forts and strongholds because there's constantly being raiders coming in from everywhere to try to get everything they could. It was just a constant thing. So that's why I was asking, because to me, Akbar's kingdom sounded very peaceful, but well, obviously, I don't think I would ever say that the Middle Ages in Europe was ever peaceful. So but I never realized the point of all these little castles everywhere, except just to show wealth. No, they were actually strategic. So I was wondering about that, but that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that we have a very similar situation here in India, where to show wealth, sure. I mean, we're about to talk about the palace that was built there, so they definitely were showing some wealth as well. But yeah, I mean, you had your walled-in market too. You had a place where if they saw a band of raiders coming, they could run inside these walls, shut these doors, and everybody in town could be safe.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Akbar is giving these locations, these different areas to people that are loyal to him and saying, oh, you can have this and go build a fort there. And I think it's probably similar, right? It's strategic. Like, I want you to hold this area for me. And that's pretty much how like medieval Europe was set up as well. It's like you had your little fiefdoms and you made alliances through marriage and things like that.
Yeah,
and then that person made sure that, or tried to make sure that that area remained under the king's control. So I would imagine it's similar setup.
So as we continue our virtual walkthrough of Bhangarh here,
Yes.
from this area, we have now another wall, an inner wall. And there are gates on this wall framed by two circular towers. Beyond that stands the royal palace, which is actually constructed into the cliffside. It's built from sandstone, 4 stories high now, although they say that it was 7 stories when it was at its height. Each story is trestled into the cliffside, which gives it this almost like cascading appearance, like it's flowing down from the upper cliffs. If you look to the north of the palace, you can see a domed structure atop the hill. That's likely a watchtower, and that stands nearly as high as the palace itself. That's probably where you would have somebody stationed to look out to see, do we see any trouble down there? There's some debate over the use of that. Some people claim that that was actually the home of the Sadhu Baba Blaneth, but it's interesting to note that that architecture is very, very similar to the fort's architecture. You have a dome resting on a square base supported by columns. It's constructed from sandstone. So it's probably not a home. It probably was related to the fort in some fashion. As we've said, in another version of the story, it wasn't Madhu Singh who ran afoul of the curse. It was his successor. In this version, Singh, he was very highly spiritual, and he took everything that Baba Blaneth said as rote. But when he died, his successor, Chathar Singh, took over the palace and decided to make it his own. And he raised the walls of the fort, he shaded out the Sadhu's house, and activated the curse. The first consequence of that was that his only son, who was 10 years old at the time, fell into Bhangarh's well. When the young prince was finally rescued, he was alive, but he had suffered a severe head injury that made him, quote, mentally unbalanced, according to rumors. It's unclear what his actual condition was, but it left him in no position to marry and in no position to take over his father's rule. Now, Chathar Singh had a problem because that was his only son. So if he was going to keep his legacy alive and he was going to keep this fort and this town in his family's hands, he was going to have to marry off one of his daughters to somebody who could carry on his legacy. The most obvious choice was his daughter, Ratnavati. She was allegedly just this gorgeous, gorgeous princess. Her beauty was unmatched in the entire kingdom. If Chathar Singh could find a suitor for her who agreed with his values, he could then continue his lineage. And as you can imagine, there were a long line of people vying for her attention. Not only because, she's a beautiful woman, but also because you get to be the de facto heir of the Kingdom of Amber, or at least this portion of it, right? So this seems like this is a really good deal. Because, humans are the way they are, this brought out a fair share of weirdos, too, including a ugly guy named Singhaya. And again, I'll just caveat that this is this is on that line of like, maybe rumor, maybe real, like maybe there's a kernel here, we're not really sure.
Okay.
Singhaya in our story was a tantric sorcerer, very well versed in magic, potions, and the dark arts. And he became obsessed with Princess Ratnavati, and he started stalking her. Now, luckily for her, and unluckily for the magical creep, she was also very well educated, coming from this sort of royal family. And through her upbringing, she'd learned not only how to navigate the political circles that she was running in, but also she learned quite a bit about magic potions and oils. We'll talk more on that in just a minute. Now, in the end, Chatar Singh picked a husband for her. That was Amber Raj Singh, the minister-in-chief of the region. When their marriage was announced, Singhaya the magician panicked, realizing, holy shit, I'm going to run out of time to woo this woman. And so he hatched a very nefarious plan. In one version of the story, he and his gross friends attacked her and her fiancé when they were alone in the garden. He cast a spell and created a noxious mist which knocked everybody unconscious. And then he abducted her and took her back to his house.
Ugh. Mustard gas? That's what I'm like immediately thinking.
Ooh, yeah.
But that would
just
probably potentially kill all of them, so maybe not the best.
I just kind of assumed that he farted really bad. So anyway, he took her back and he tried to convince her to marry him instead. But she declined because he fucking kidnapped her and he was very obviously crazy. Luckily, the palace guards showed up and saved her and threw Singhaya out of the village. And so now he's this wandering guy outside. But he still didn't let up. Using all of his alchemical knowledge, he crafted a love potion. And then posing as a vendor, he tricked one of Ratnavati's handmaidens to buy this love potion and use it on her hair. The potion worked. And the princess wandered out of the palace and into the nearby forest, where he again captured her. This time, she's under his thrall. They get to his camp, and then the love potion wore off, and she was again stuck with this lunatic. So she said, you gotta let me go. The guards are gonna come and look for me. He refused, and left with no choice, she doused herself in ghee and leapt into the fire where she burned alive.
Oh my God. She should have killed him instead, I'm just saying. But that's fine.
Well, just hold that thought, because there's another version of this story that I like a lot more.
Okay, that's version one. Okay.
Yeah, this is version one. Version one also ends with the angry Singhaya, who's also still crazy, having watched his love burn herself alive because she didn't want to be with him. He decides to curse the king and the region and says, hey, if we can't be together in life, then we'll be together in death. And he slit his own throat. Like the most unromantic Romeo and Juliet.
I have to say, like, I always love hearing old stories because it tells you how much more violent the culture was in a day-to-day basis than it is now. Because, like, even if you think of, like, Grimm's fairy tales, right? They're all quite violent. And I think violence was just such a part of life. I mean, we talked about this just, 5 minutes ago about raiders all the time, just coming all the time. Anyway, I just find it so fascinating because no one would write a love story like that anymore. Like maybe a little bit, like you might have one death and it would be romantic, like a la Romeo and Juliet, maybe. But anyway, keep going. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a tragedy, to be clear. This isn't a love story. You're not supposed to root for this guy who abducted this princess, but yeah.
Clearly, but I mean, even the tragedy, it's just like violent. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So in the more feminist version of the story, it wasn't the handmaid who bought the potion, but it was Ratnavati herself. Singhaya disguised himself as a perfumist and snuck into the palace as a vendor in the marketplace. But when she smelled the oil, she recognized the odor of black magic because she was educated. She knew these types of things. And she realized what was going on, and she threw the oil on the ground, and it formed into a boulder, which crushed Singhaya, Indiana Jones style.
Nice.
Okay.
And then, with his dying breath, he cursed the village of Bhangarh.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a much better story than the other one.
Yeah, so oil turned into a rock?
Yeah, and there again, so there's a bunch of different versions,
I don't
right?
think this is true, Matt.
Also, does she end up marrying the other guy? Like,
Yes.
who in real life came after her dad? Like, in the history books.
Yeah, it's weird because I'm not even sure that she was real. There was a Ratnavati, and there's a girls' school in Jaisalmer that's named for Ratnavati, but I'm not sure that is this Ratnavati. She's like kind of a. I can't think of a good comparison, like a folklore comparison for us, but she's this sort of mythical, beautiful.
Like a King Arthur?
So, yeah, a little bit, right? Like it might be true, but it might not, And there are these places that exist around her, and there's a lot of TV about this sort of thing and stuff. But was she real? I don't really know,
Okay.
There's also allegedly a shatri, or a dome-shaped pavilion, that is claimed to be the final resting place of Singhaya that's near Bhangarh. But that doesn't make any fucking sense at all, because this is a guy who tried to abduct a princess. And it doesn't really seem like they would have buried him and given him this like fucking altar
Honor,
and
yeah.
shit, right? Yeah.
Could have been some other dude named Singhaya.
Yeah, it was probably actually used for religious practice. That's the assumption. But this is where the stuff gets blurry, because you start to have these ghost hunting groups and these rumors that say, oh yeah, well, he's buried over there. That's if you go over there and you call to him, you get your cold spots and your unseen voices, and
Which
that
is
kind of
very
stuff.
convenient for their purposes.
Oh yeah. Okay, those are the rumors, the two major rumors about the curse of Bhangarh. We have that the walls were built too high and it cursed the palace and the fort, or that this princess ran afoul of some creepy sorcerer, and the creepy sorcerer cursed the palace for one reason or another. That's kind of where all of this starts to stem from. But the reason that those rumors get connected to Bhangarh involves the fact that Bhangarh, and we're talking about the Mughal Empire itself, they're so prosperous. They are using this incredible agricultural system to generate a whole bunch of wealth, and then within a relatively short amount of time, they're going to completely disappear. And that, when you recontextualize, feels a little bit like the fulfillment of a curse. If you have this gorgeous Bhangarh Fort that's suddenly abandoned, and when we say suddenly, we're talking suddenly over the course of like less than a century, right? But less than a century to depopulate an entire town is pretty substantial. Like, that's pretty quick. What the fuck happened?
Yeah.
Is it possible that that's a curse?
It's within living memory.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true.
yeah. You would remember, hey, my grandparents lived here and they don't anymore. So the thing is, by the mid 1700s, the Mughal Empire was starting to enter decline. They had been in nearly endless wars with their neighboring territories. They had internal struggles of the thrones of their various kingdoms, and they've just kind of become unstable. As the government devolved into infighting, these massive war fronts that they had established were just too costly to maintain. That depleted wealth from their own communities, which led to internal poverty, which led to more infighting. The nobility, seeing their revenues declining, started to turn their backs on the government. And it didn't help that both the British and the Dutch had also entered the chat with their respective East India companies. The Mughals now had to contend with nearly constant attempts to overthrow their power from native Indian people, but also these European companies who were coming to bear with a massive amount of not only money, but also military power. Because the East India companies, it's a little bit, there was just a incredible last podcast episode talking about the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. But basically, they were, if you think of Amazon combined with a military force, that's what these companies were. They had soldiers and shit.
Yeah, their series on the Batavia is amazing.
Yeah. Anyway, we have the arrival of these East India companies, and it just becomes too much for the Mughal Empire to bear. In 1757, the Durrani army of Afghanistan sacked Delhi, which was the capital of the Mughal Empire. And as the Durranis continued to push deeper into the country, the British East India Company was like, oh, instability?
Yeah.
Oh, you just lost your main capital? Let's take this opportunity for ourselves, old chap. And less than 6 months after the sack of Delhi, a combined army of British and French soldiers took Bengal in the Battle of Plassey. That was sort of the tipping point for the Mughal Empire. By the end of the century, Britain had taken control over most of the region, and it would remain under British rule until the end of World War II. Mughal Empire was over, and with it, Bhangarh Fort fell into decline. You had this city with townhomes and temples, and now it's all in the shadow of this darkened palace. And it's starting to look run down. It's starting to look ruined.
You would think that the English would take that fort over and use it strategically.
I don't actually know why they didn't.
We can talk more about this. I mean, I think that like they were concerned about money first and foremost. They weren't necessarily concerned about land as long as they controlled it. This is total speculation, but I wonder, like, given their military might and more modern armies, I just wonder if they didn't think of it the same way, right? Like, they didn't need to have these forts, and it costs money to maintain them.
No, I think that's a good point. Maybe like their strategy was stay centralized, stay in one strong location. I don't know, fan out from there as you wish to exploit, but
yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, they definitely viewed it more as a business enterprise for sure. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I don't know how much they would have worried about a place like that and maintaining it. It seems like maybe for strategic control it would have been useful, but if there wasn't any infighting in that region, then who cares? We don't need it.
Yeah, and maybe I'm thinking too far ahead. Like if they were there to take all of India immediately on day one, then maybe they would set up people in strategic fort locations to sort of, fight a decentralized force, opposition force. But if they're there day one to basically be Amazon with guns, then they're probably going to want to be in a more centralized location because they don't need to do anything else at the moment.
Yeah, and they pretty much just wanted grains.
Yeah,
right.
It seems pretty simple. And spices, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, and it was all about administrative and financial control.
As Rajasthan starts to enter the 19th century now, you have rumors that are circulating about this abandoned fort, though, and why it's so strange because you're talking really, like I said, within a century, within memory, it's abandoned. These legends grew as locals tried to explain what led to this. And as we see time and time again, ghosts become the blame. Not just any ghosts, but the Bhootas or the boots. These are, in their simplest form, the spirits of the dead that for some reason haven't been able to move on. Bhootas are doomed to walk the earth or haunt certain locations, forever trapped between the planes of their mortal world and whatever the afterlife is. unlike Western religions, Hinduism and Jainism subscribe to this idea of transmigration, right? That souls of the dead are reborn as new individuals, new beings. And if you can go through enough rebirth and life cycles and you live your life according to certain tenets, you can reach nirvana, this state of ultimate spiritual oneness and salvational release, right? So generally, in the Hindu and the Jain Dharma life cycle, a person is born, they die, and then their soul moves on to the next body, life begins again. But sometimes something might prevent that soul from going to the next host. And when that life cycle gets interrupted, and when I say life cycle, I mean life cycle of the entire, the spirit, not the body, right? That when that cycle gets interrupted, you create an untethered soul. And that soul, they can't take residence in a body anymore. They can't ascend to nirvana because they haven't made it through enough cycles. So they become a Bhuta, or a ghost.
Is this entrenched in the religion, or is this kind of how Christianity? Well, I would say ghosts aren't really connected to Christianity in that way, really. Like we don't.
Yeah.
So
it's mythology. So it is sort of yes. I mean, are you asking are Bhutas present in the religious in the religious texts of Hindu and the Hindu and Dharma religion?
I'm sorry, I'm thinking Buddhism. Yeah.
Okay.
Is it related to Hindu?
Yeah. Is it like,
and Jain?
I think what you're asking, EJ, and I would have the same question. Like, I read a little bit about these, but I'm not really clear from what I read. Is it kind of like purgatory, right? In the Catholic religion, it's like if, there's like this third space, or if you don't make it to heaven and you don't get sent to hell, there's like a third space of purgatory.
It's like a Starbucks. Yeah.
Right.
It's like purgatory.
And
Right.
From the way you described it, Matt, it's like potentially you become a Bhuta because your transmigration gets interrupted, right? So it's like there's this third space where you're sort of stuck, which makes it sound like it's almost like could be part of the religious understanding of like what happens to people after they die, or what happens to things after they die. But like when I was reading about it, it doesn't necessarily sound like that. It just sounds like how we understand ghosts, right? Which is like but it's their description of what ghosts are versus our description of what ghosts are.
Okay.
And like, yeah, that's sort of how I read it. Like, but would you agree, Matt?
Yeah, it gets. I think it gets retroactively folded in. So the religions, Hinduism, Jainism, exist separately from the Bhuta mythology, but in order to help define what Bhutas are and why they exist, you have to define them in the context of these religious texts. In much the same way that we kind of have to define our Western ghosts in the context of Judeo-Christianity.
Right.
I would say what's interesting to that point, Matt, is that when I was reading about Bhutas, it sort of like plays to the transmigration, right? The things that they haunt. This is from Encyclopedia Britannica. They haunt trees, deserts, abandoned houses, the hearths and roofs of homes, crossroads and boundaries, but they never rest on the ground. So I think it's interesting because it's kind of retrofitting. It fits into this idea of transmigration. They have to go into something, but that something can't be like a new life. It has to be inanimate, like physical object. I guess trees aren't inanimate, but it's like landscapes, houses, trees. They don't become another thing. Does that make sense?
They are questing for a home, right? Because they've become untethered from their physical body, their place, right?
But they can shapeshift, which is also weird.
Yes, they can.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. Fucking creepy, actually. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so they're looking for another place to kind of take up residence, and they like residence in, and this is getting a little bit ahead, but they like residence in abandoned places. They like residence in dirty places.
Oh.
And so they are drawn to abandoned homes, abandoned buildings, abandoned forts, that kind of thing, which is
Okay.
why they're going to get
Yeah.
round up here.
Also, one more weird thing I read about Bhutas, which I was like,
Yeah.
ugh, is that their feet are always backwards
Yes, you can tell a Bhuta because their feet are backwards.
and they don't touch the ground. So
Yeah, they
like,
don't touch they never touch the ground. They will sit, they will hover. Yeah.
That is so cool.
so the
Yeah, isn't that
stories
cool?
are like I was reading like some of the stories, and they sound so much like some of our stories of like, oh, I picked up this hitchhiker and then I realized that the hitchhiker wasn't really there. It's like those same stories exist, but they're Bhutas. So it's like the person will be like, the live person will be interacting with this other person that they think is a human, and then they'll suddenly realize that the feet are backwards, or that like the person's
Yeah.
not actually walking next to them, they're like hovering over the ground. And I'm like, ooh, creepy.
that is really creepy, dude.
There's
Oh man, I love that.
there's a really common like urban legend style Bhuta story where so women who die in childbirth are very prone to becoming Bhutas. And they have their entire own subcategory of Bhuta that is the churel. And if a woman dies in childbirth and she is not buried with her unborn child, her spirit will become a Bhuta and she will walk the earth. Well, not walk, because we said they can't touch the ground, but she'll roam. And she will walk the roadside. And if you come across her, she will take the form of a beautiful maiden and try to lure you into marrying her. And then you'll end up married to a Bhuta.
And then you'll die.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so there are a couple. Let's talk about how you create a Bhuta, how you would interrupt the life cycle, right? So one idea involved the belief that your soul becomes untethered from your body as you sleep, and this allegedly explains dreams, where you may recall doing some things that you've never done or traveling to places that you've never been. That's actually your soul wandering away from your body while you sleep and getting up to some shit before coming back home. If anyone plays a prank on you, like drawing a mustache on you or altering your appearance, your soul might not recognize who you are anymore and might become lost, not know how to get home or where home is. And that would create a Bhuta. That also was used to explain why people would die in their sleep sometimes. They would say, oh, your soul couldn't come home.
Oh, so sleep must have been kind of a scary concept.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when you were sleeping, your soul was actually disappearing briefly.
Oh, wow. And all of those funny like sleepover pranks that were like, haha, you drew on your face or whatever.
Yeah,
That
you
would be
dick on your
dangerous
face.
activities.
Yeah.
Wow, we were playing with fire as children. Wow. It's kind of beautiful and scary at the same time. Like the fact that your soul can go on a trip somewhere as you
Right.
sleep, but also
But might not come back.
might not come back.
That's
Yeah.
scary shit. A Bhuta could also be created if your spouse died and then you remarried. The soul of your former spouse would hang around and bring misfortune and sickness to the new marriage as an act of revenge.
To me, that's a curious retrofit because
I think so too.
Because
Yeah.
if your spouse died and was buried, didn't die a violent death, like some of these other things that they say create Bhutas, like wouldn't your spouse just like transmigrate and move on in its own like journey, in his or her own journey? Like why would they become a Bhuta to come back and haunt you because you got remarried? Theoretically, they've already like moved on in their own journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, this totally sounds like something that some guy just said at some point. Like, if I die, you bet I'm gonna come back and haunt you.
That's-
You better not remarry.
Yes. Yes.
I see how you've been looking at Larry down the street.
Yeah. Sexy Larry.
Sexy Larry.
Bhutas themselves are always thirsty, and they'll drink any water or milk that you leave out overnight. You can always recognize them because they have this insatiable thirst. And therefore, salt is incredibly effective against them because it dries them out more and forces them to go and seek more water. You can protect your home by scattering salt around as a protective ward. And this is interesting to me because this seems to be the origin of the common myth that salt repels ghosts.
Okay, I was going to ask that because I know that's a thing in like at least Western ghost magic repellent crap. You do see salt.
Yeah. So the general consensus being that throughout human history, we've used salt as a way of preserving dead tissue and preventing that flesh from decaying. Gives the idea like we're preventing it from becoming a ghost, right? So salt ends up connected to purification and protection against evil and curses. And I think that is also the idea that salt is it's a pure mineral. And so that purity repels the evil of a ghost or a Bhuta. Now, we have these thirsty Bhutas. If you share a bowl of milk with a Bhuta, whether you intended to or not, you risk that the Bhuta will possess you. And the origin of this myth, I think, is fairly common, fairly obvious. Don't drink milk that's just been sitting out.
Yes.
Oh,
That's not healthy.
I've never heard that. That just naturally makes sense to me because it could go bad.
No, exactly. Yeah. I'm not saying that this is some like legend thing. It's just kind of like, oh, it is seen some milk sitting out overnight. Don't drink it.
Yeah.
The other Bhuta repellent is turmeric, especially burning turmeric. So many altars and shrines will have burning turmeric to keep evil spirits away from them. But since we have this idea of transmigration and this idea that the souls are never going to be created or destroyed or moved to another plane, you can never actually harm a Bhuta. There's nothing you can do to hurt it. You can only drive it away with salt or with turmeric. They will exist forever.
So there's no because in a lot of what I'll say, modern ghost hunting shows or recent ghost hunting shows, there's a lot of this helping the ghost pass over to the other side so that it doesn't keep lingering at the house or whatever it's doing.
Yeah.
Supposedly doing, allegedly doing. So here there's not that possibility. If you become a Bhuta, you're just a Bhuta.
Right, because in order to transmigrate to the next form, you have to do so living out your life in a physical way. At least the way that I understand it is that only through a physical body and through your physical actions are you able to ascend to the next life cycle. So if you don't have a physical body like a Bhuta, you can't do the things that will push you to the next life cycle.
It's a bummer.
Yeah. A lot of the times it's not even your damn fault. They don't bury you properly or
you just died suddenly. I mean the impression here is that if you die in a car accident, like if you die a violent death, you become a Bhuta.
How does this, I'm just asking questions we don't know the answers to. But my question is, how does this align with soldiers? Because obviously if you're a soldier, you might die a death. I'm actually as I said that, I have a little note here about how there are also Bhutas that are the spirits of deified heroes of Hindu deities and animals, and they're referred to as ghosts or demons. They're sometimes referred to as ghosts or demons, but they're not actually. They're protective and benevolent beings. So I'm wondering, that's one little snippet that I read, but maybe that's how they make space for warriors who died in battle, because I'm thinking you wouldn't want to say that if you die a violent death, you're going to become a Bhuta, but also go fight in this war and you might die.
You're not going to get many people.
So in William Crook's Popular Religion and Folklore of Northern India, he breaks down all these different classifications, and there's a dozen different classifications of Bhutas, or I guess subclasses of Bhutas, and they fit all these different things. This is kind of a great big overview of all of that. But yes, so there are then also these more benevolent, not malevolent, but benevolent, protective spirits as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I did see that Bhutas may try to possess living people by entering through their mouths. Therefore, yawning is a dangerous practice. as you're providing an open door for these spirits. And
Is that why we have to cover our mouths when we yawn?
Right, right. And sneezing is expelling them. So I just imagine that you sneeze and you see these Bhootas doing somersaults through the air, flying backwards.
Wait, is that a way? Would Bhootas, I'm just like putting things together again, pure speculation. Would Bhootas want to possess someone because that could be a way for them to transmigrate and
Yes.
like stop being Bhuta? Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I see.
They also, if you encounter one, they may speak in a nasal twang.
Oh yeah, I did read this. So weird.
Is yet another reason to avoid country music singers.
They're all Bhutas.
With their backwards Bhutas. Sorry, that was a really bad joke.
That's good. I like that.
Several of the languages of northern India, like Hindi and Punjabi, use the phrase "Bhoot Sawar Hona," which literally translates to being ridden by a Buddha, which is kind of, we talked about this, EJ, being ridden by a hag.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the old hag, when you look exhausted or haggard, you've been ridden by the hag. This is a similar concept.
Yeah, I also saw a phrase where basically if you're like obsessed of something or like really focused on something and can't get over it or keep talking about it, Bhuta, they'll say like, you know, you have a Bhuta or something. Like basically it's haunting you.
It gets used colloquially as like an obsession or an addiction. And a boot uttarana, or dismount the Bhuta, means you have overcome that or you freed yourself from an obsession or an addiction.
Oh, that's cool.
So, you know, as they are untethered from their physical forms, they spend their days trying to find a new host. They prefer to stick to the homes that they died in, if they can. If a living person tries to take up residence in a house that's haunted by a Bhuta, they risk angering the Bhuta, which will bring them endless bad luck. It's very common with, you know, any ghost story. And since Bhutas are attracted to dirt and filth, houses or buildings that stand vacant for a long time are very attractive to them. So basically, you can't move into somebody's house after they've died tragically, and you can't leave a house vacant too long or you risk spiritual infestation. They even become very attached to the bricks, to the actual masonry that's used to build the home. One story that I was reading talked of repairing a dam in Mumbai using repurposed bricks. And the workers who handled these bricks fell ill with dysentery, and they claimed that that was because of the Bhuta's curse. So I think all of that makes it really obvious why the hauntings at Bhangarh became commonplace, or at least the rumors of them. You have the downfall of the Mughal Empire, and in turn, their illustrious prosperity. This village becomes abandoned. And it doesn't help that at the close of the 18th century, we have this already impoverished Mughal Empire that gets struck with two natural disasters back to back. First, in 1770, a massive famine and smallpox outbreak devastated the Bengal region of East India. That hit a population that was already strained under Britain's new tax laws, and it became too much to bear and drove residents to flee their towns and travel to more plentiful regions. The monsoon season brought fresh rain and replenished the crops, but the workers had already migrated. So you had these abandoned plantations that were just vacant. These migrating populations then put additional pressure on other territories in India. And the British East India Company, suddenly seeing these farms bereft of workers, said, let's increase prices. This, in turn, drove more Indians into poverty. And fewer people on smaller land means more people eating crops, which pushed the region's agriculture to the absolute limit. Then, 10 years later, in 1780, El Nino conditions produced a series of massive droughts that destroyed the few crops that remained. This resulted in the Chalisa famine, a devastating agricultural blight that killed 11 million people. With few resources left, locals were forced to depopulate again. So within 20 years, we've seen 2 depopulation events. Edward Stokes, in an article in Modern Asian Studies, estimates that the Chalisa famine depopulated about 30% of Delhi and the surrounding villages. For context, that's about 200 miles, 300 kilometers from Bhangarh. That sounds like a long distance, but remember that Bhangarh, the fort, the palace, the village, they were all already in economic downturn at the time. So even a small percentage of depopulation would cause a catastrophic collapse in the economy of Bhangarh. 1783, the town is deserted. Bhangarh is gone. You have once opulent walls of this cliffside palace that are falling into disrepair. The market bazaars that were thronged with bodies are now empty. Temples, homes are being overgrown, and the rainforest starts to take over Bhangarh. The echoes of the mythological storytelling should become very clear at this point, I think. You have Madhu Singh, or possibly Chatar Singh, who refused to heed the Sadhu's warning. The palace fort was too lavish. It shaded the Sadhu's home, and tragedy befell the residents. Vengeful spirits, these Bhootas, descended on the town, driven by their unquenchable thirst. They drank the water reserves dry. They brought this drought, which brought famine and disease on its heels. And now the Bhootas took up residence in these empty apartments and temples and the empty palace, and they have made Bhangarh Fort their home. So now we have a new population there, one full of malicious ghosts. Now, obviously, this is all rhetoric, right? Like, obviously. But I think it's easy to see how these threads connect. And it didn't help that over the next 200 years, Bhangarh Fort continued to stand vacant. And as it decayed and started to look more like our quintessential abandoned, haunted village, stories grew about these residents. But the ghosts didn't cause the famine. In fact, El Nino certainly didn't help to ease the pressure. But even that probably wasn't the reason that India's agriculture collapsed in the 18th century. Like most things in history, this is very complicated, but it kinda goes like this. When the British East India Company seized control of the region in the latter half of the 18th century, they turned much of the economy toward agriculture. England wanted opium, they wanted wheat, they wanted cotton, they wanted spices, other crops, and these were farmed in India. This stabilized the British grain trade, which allowed the UK to have access to cheaper food. However, now we have a gigantic chunk of India's agriculture being shipped to Europe, right? This created a food vacuum in India and drove crop prices really, really high. That destabilized the local economy, and then when we got a dry monsoon season, that exacerbated the conditions even more.
All of that, and then also a second reason was that India was actually quite industrialized. They had a huge manufacturing sector for textiles. A very large percentage of the world's textiles came from India, and European textiles couldn't compete with that. So when the East India Company came to India, through a series of closures and readjusting taxes and tariffs that India had on English goods and that kind of thing, they basically killed the manufacturing industry, which pushed everyone into agriculture, which also meant that when there were monsoons or droughts or things like that, the economy was less able to weather those things because everyone had been pushed into agriculture now rather than having these sources of revenue through manufacturing. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
Not only was it everything Matt said, that they were pushing everyone into agriculture and then exporting all the food, they also killed the other area of the economy where people could be making money to theoretically purchase food from elsewhere. It was two-pronged.
And then you get an El Nino. You get hot and dry weather that pushes this economy to the absolute limit. You get famines. And the East India Company, throughout the famines, is continuing to export grains to the UK. So they're taking all the resources out of India. That means that the best chance of you getting a job in India is working for the very company that was exploiting your land.
The economic principle at the time about famines was that trying to do anything about them was useless or maybe even harmful.
Oh, yeah.
And-
I'm about to talk about this. Oh, yeah.
What?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. It's hard to say if India would have weathered these 19th century catastrophes if the East India Company hadn't exacerbated the problem with their trade. Some historians claim that the impact of trade was minimal compared to the devastation of the weather conditions. But I find it really hard to believe that Britain actively stripping the land of its food resources didn't have some contribution to a series of famines, which somehow never seemed to affect the Mughal Empire in the previous centuries, despite continual wars that they were under.
Well, like Katie said, it seems like they collapsed the economy by stripping it of its diversity.
Yeah.
And stealing everything. Like they they still were producing a lot of food. They just were exporting all of it to Britain instead of allowing anyone in the country to have food.
I think this is exactly what happened to Ireland.
Yeah, because heaven forbid that people in Britain have to pay a little bit more for their wheat or their opium while this devastation is happening in India. Now, we also have to point out that the British government did basically nothing to help alleviate the pressures from the famines. The idea of diverting money from export to famine relief was almost universally rejected, with Lord Lytton, the Viceroy of India, saying in 1877, "There is to be no interference of any kind on the part of government with the object of reducing the price of food. Mere distress is not a significant reason for opening a relief work."
Mm-hmm. And they basically believed it was, I think from what little I read, a misreading of Malthusian principles. So he had theories of overpopulation. He had population studies, and he was very popular at the end of the 1700s and the 1800s. But they decided that famines were just, quote, nature's way of responding to overpopulation. And so they didn't think that they needed to do anything about it. Malthusian principles, like his idea was just that there could be too many people. Like overpopulation was a thing that could happen where like we could not produce enough to support the population. I didn't read too deeply into this, but my understanding is that nature's way of responding to overpopulation is a misreading of what he was saying. He was just saying that overpopulation is a thing that could happen. And instead, they were just like, great, so we'll just won't do anything about this because we need to get rid of these extra people.
Yeah, they probably didn't even see them as people. They just saw them as,
they were just hands
in the way
to do the work.
Right. Yeah, or hands to do the work, right?
When I read this, I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. Like, this is a deep cut reference to what Charles Dickens was referencing when Scrooge says, if they're going to die, they better do it and decrease the surplus population. I'm like, shit, that was like a common understanding of rich people during this period. And I love that I had that thought, because this is why I love learning about history, because you're like, oh, that's such a famous line, and you just think of it as Scrooge being an asshole. But actually, that was like a common thought of people of his social class and who were involved in the economy at that time. Anyway, that's a fun little aside when I was reading about this.
That's fascinating.
Like an actual philosophical touchstone of the time, right?
Yeah. It isn't just like a line that Dickens made up. I mean, it is, but like it's something that people actually thought.
In addition to that, they also looked at Adam Smith, the, father of modern economics, the same guy that your one libertarian friend always quotes when you try to talk to him about how evil Amazon is, right? This fucking guy. So that idea was just, you stay out of your way, keep your hands off the wheel, focus on keeping things as cheap as possible, and somehow everything's going to work out. That's the Adam Smith idea, the invisible hand, right?
Right.
But this laissez-faire attitude allowed Adam Smith's invisible hand to kill millions of Indian workers throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. By the 1880s, humanitarian-minded leaders finally got a foothold, and a famine commission was established in India. A series of regulations were put in place called the Famine Codes, which helped detect and prevent further shortages and stop mass deaths. By 1902, just 20 years later, the famine had ended. A problem that had plagued the region for over a century was finally over.
Yeah. I just want to put in for some stats for our listeners in my research. So a catastrophic famine is defined as a famine that kills over 1 million people. And there were 9 catastrophic famines in India between the years of 1770 and 1900, but 7 of those occurred between 1860 and 1900. So you had 7 catastrophic famines, which means at least 7 million people, but it was way, way, way more than that. Some of them killed 5 million, 10 million people in 40 years. And so, yeah, the famine codes helped. Thank goodness they put them in place. I also, just to put one more number on this, so excess deaths, which means like people who died because of causes that were potentially preventable. I was reading an article in Al Jazeera. Conservatively, between the 1880s and the 1920s, conservatively, 50 million excess deaths in India, but it could be as high as 165 million. So historians land around 100 million. They split the difference. And this is based on records that were being kept at the time in the 1880s. They started keeping records, maybe because of the famine codes. They started keeping records of deaths.
It was. Yeah.
And like more censuses. But yeah, I just wanted to say some of those numbers because I think having a real understanding of how devastating the British policies were to the Indian people is, I think, important.
And you've now created a culture that is surrounded by this type of catastrophic fatality, right? Constantly. You can see how the victims of these famines, whose lives ended in suffering and pain before their time, they make the perfect fodder for our ghost stories, our Bhuta stories. Millions, what do we say, 100 million people, right? 100 million people dead, succumbing to starvation, continue to live on in India's memory in this way.
Not all this, just to clarify, not all those people were not from famines, but it was everything, illness, etc. But just from famines,
fallout.
Probably the fallout.
The famines, and to clarify that the famines also tended to bring with them like epidemics. You would have smallpox that would run through that, dysentery, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
that's why, like when you talk about colonialism, it's kind of hard to say the single cause of anything. Like colonialism causes all kinds of scattered reasons for multiple deaths.
Yeah.
So it's a good point.
An early nationalist, leading nationalist in 1901 set the death toll from the famines at around 15 million from the 1860s to 1900. So 15 million people just from famines. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. No. That's important. But yes. So you have this now increasing population of Bhutas who are arising in this short amount of time. And there's nowhere that they are more prevalent than at Bhangarh Fort, This once thriving metropolis now crumbling and ruined, exactly what the Bhootas are looking for. And with those ghost stories and the modern paranormal investigators who travel to Bhangarh to find out what's really going on, we will conclude our series next time.
Awesome.
So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
We're going to get into some ghost hunting.
Oh yeah, the next episode will be all ghost hunting, pretty much. There you go. That's the Indian history condensed into short a time as we can make it, which was not that short, but
It's very important to lay the context. Though.
well, and it is, and you know, the mythology of Bhutas are important. They're obviously very intrinsic to this story, but also why Bhangarh and why do these rumors surround Bhangarh, and seeing this powerhouse, this economic powerhouse disappear in what feels like overnight, seeing a sudden rash of deaths that come from a situation that's out of your control. You can understand why the response to that is this ghostly one.
Yeah, it's such a perfect metaphor, right? Mm-hmm. Bhangarh was a pinnacle of Indian culture, or that part of India, before the British showed up. And then its decline and the draining of its wealth, the draining of its prosperity, you can just see the metaphor to what is happening in the country. And then you just bring in the Bhutas to haunt the place, because it's a response to the trauma that's happening all around you.
And it's also really cool in a way, because I feel like that preserves the history too. You get the opportunity to continue to talk about these things, to continue to remember the stories of, remember when there was a princess who lived here who was under the attack by this evil shaman. Like these types of things, we can remember the culture and the history and the stories through ghost stories. And I think that that's a very human, a very natural way for us to tell our legacy, even, in the wake of tragedy.
It's an oral history.
And they always create more and more new stories as they go, which is never ending.
Yeah, which we'll see next time. We'll see the modern incarnations of this next time.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to get outside our, regular American tales and talk about something completely different. So, yeah. Thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Be safe out there. Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the 40 in History podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways you can show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on socials at Slaying Monsters Podcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.